This is HOA Neighbor Wars. The audit log was louder than her yelling. You are on the record now. Nicole Barrett screamed that at me while jabbing her finger toward my face. She was holding a clipboard in one hand and her portable thermal printer in the other, and she told me she would make this a lean conversation if I kept denying it. I stood on my front porch in Briarwood Reserve, Austin, Texas, staring at a woman who had just accused me of stealing packages from my own neighbors. I had reported a missing package to the management office 2 hours earlier. Now the HOA Architectural Committee member was at my door treating it like a personal insult. Nicole had a key ring with too many keys that she jingled like it was authority. She waved it in my face and told me she had the authority to confiscate my property. I asked her what property she was talking about. She said my phone, my mail, anything that contained evidence of theft. I told her I had not stolen anything. She said my denial was proof I was hiding something. She pulled out a laminated policy sheet and waved it without letting me read it. She said the policy gave her enforcement powers and I was in violation. I asked her what violation. She said theft, harassment, and obstruction. I told her I had filed a complaint about a missing package. She said that was the problem. She said I was using the complaint system to cover my tracks. Nicole told me she would escalate this immediately. That was her catchphrase. She said it twice in the first 5 minutes. She said the HOA had reports of package theft in the neighborhood and I fit the profile. I asked her what profile. She said someone who works irregular hours and has access to the common areas. I am a firefighter. I work 24-hour shifts. Nicole said that made me suspicious. She said I was casing cars and mailboxes during my off days. I told her that was ridiculous. She said the parking lot camera showed me near the mailbox cluster at odd times. I told her I lived here and checked my mail. She said that was not an excuse. She told me she was opening an investigation and I needed to provide documentation. I asked her what kind of documentation. She said receipts for every package I received in the last 6 months, along with delivery confirmations and photos of the contents. I told her that was insane. She said it was standard procedure. She pulled out her thermal printer and printed a notice on the spot. The paper was still warm when she handed it to me. The notice said I had 72 hours to comply or face a $500 fine and suspension of my access fob. I told her I would not comply with an illegal demand. She said refusal to cooperate was an additional violation. She said she could suspend my fob today. Nicole told me the clubhouse event started in an hour. She said she was going to make an announcement about the theft problem, and she would be naming suspects. I told her she could not do that. She said, "Watch me." She turned and walked toward the sidewalk. I stood there holding the warm notice and trying to process what had just happened. My neighbor across the street, an older man named Greg, was standing in his driveway watching. He gave me a look that said he had seen this before. I went inside and called the management company. The receptionist put me through to the property manager, a woman named Linda. I explained what had just happened. Linda sighed and told me Nicole had been causing problems for months. She said Nicole was not authorized to issue fines or suspend access without board approval. I asked Linda why Nicole thought she could do that. Linda said Nicole had been telling residents she had special enforcement powers as the Architectural Committee member. Linda said it was not true and I should ignore the notice. I told Linda I could not ignore it, because Nicole was about to announce my name at a public event. Linda said she would handle it. I hung up and looked at the notice again. It had my name, my address, and a case number that Nicole had apparently invented. The bottom of the notice said failure to comply would result in enforcement action, including towing and legal proceedings. I took a photo of the notice and texted it to my girlfriend Rachel. She called me immediately. She asked me what the hell was going on. I told her Nicole had accused me of stealing packages. Rachel said this was the third time in 2 months that Nicole had targeted me. The first time was a complaint about my trash cans being on the curb 15 minutes past the deadline. The second time was a notice about a crack in my driveway that Nicole claimed was a safety hazard. Rachel said Nicole was obsessed with enforcement and I needed to fight back. I told her I was trying. Rachel said she was coming over. The clubhouse event was a quarterly community social. Nicole had organized it and was using it as a platform to deliver HOA updates and complaints. I did not want to go. Rachel insisted. She said if I did not show up, Nicole would use my absence as proof of guilt. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later. She was wearing a jacket and carrying a notebook. She told me she was going to take notes and record anything Nicole said. I told her that was a good idea. We walked to the clubhouse together. The clubhouse was full. About 40 residents were sitting in folding chairs facing a small stage. Nicole was standing at a podium with a microphone. She had a stack of papers in front of her, and her key ring was sitting on the podium like a prop. When Rachel and I walked in, Nicole looked directly at me and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. She tapped the microphone and told everyone to take their seats. She said she had important updates about community safety. Nicole started by talking about recent thefts. She said multiple residents had reported missing packages, missing items from their cars, and missing supplies from the clubhouse storage closet. She said the HOA was taking the problem seriously and conducting an investigation. She said suspects had been identified. She looked at me when she said that. A few people in the audience turned to look at me. Rachel squeezed my hand. Nicole said the investigation was ongoing, and she could not share details yet, but residents should be vigilant and report any suspicious activity. She said suspicious activity included people loitering near mailboxes, people walking around the parking lot at odd hours, and people who refused to cooperate with HOA inquiries. A man in the front row raised his hand and asked Nicole if she had contacted the police. Nicole said the police were not equipped to handle HOA enforcement matters. She said the HOA had its own procedures, and those procedures were sufficient. The man asked if the HOA was accusing anyone. Nicole said she could not comment on active investigations. The man said that sounded like a yes. Nicole told him to sit down. The room got quiet. After the meeting, Nicole walked straight toward me. She had her clipboard and her thermal printer. She told me she needed to ask me some follow-up questions. I told her I had already answered her questions. She said my answers were inadequate. Rachel stepped forward and told Nicole to leave me alone. Nicole ignored Rachel and told me I needed to come to the management office for a formal interview. I told her I would not do that. Nicole said refusal to cooperate would be noted in her report. She pulled out her phone and started taking photos of me. She held the phone inches from my face and took 3 or 4 photos in rapid succession. Rachel told her to stop. Nicole said she was documenting evidence. Rachel grabbed my arm and told me we were leaving. Nicole followed us out of the clubhouse. She was still taking photos. When we got to the parking lot, Nicole told me she was issuing a formal notice of violation. She printed another notice on her thermal printer and handed it to me. This one said I was prohibited from using the clubhouse, the gym, and the pool until the investigation was resolved. I told her she did not have the authority to do that. She said I could challenge the notice at the next board meeting, which was 3 weeks away. Rachel told Nicole she was going to file a harassment complaint. Nicole said go ahead. She jingled her keyring and walked away. That night, I reviewed the doorbell camera footage from my porch. The camera had captured the entire confrontation with Nicole earlier that day. I watched the footage 3 times. Nicole had lied. She claimed I had been seen loitering near the mailbox cluster, but my own footage showed I had walked directly to my mailbox, collected my mail, and walked back to my unit without stopping. The timestamp on the footage was clear. I saved the clip and backed it up to the cloud. The next morning, I went to the management office. Linda was at the front desk. I told her I needed to file a formal complaint against Nicole. Linda handed me a complaint form and told me to be specific. I filled out the form and attached screenshots from my doorbell camera. I also attached copies of the 2 notices Nicole had issued. Linda read the form and told me she would forward it to the regional supervisor. I asked her how long that would take. She said a few days. I told her Nicole was threatening to suspend my access fob. Linda said she could not stop Nicole from submitting a suspension request, but the regional supervisor would have to approve it. I asked Linda if Nicole had submitted a request yet. Linda checked her computer and said no. I left the management office and went to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and tried to think through my next steps. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Greg, my neighbor across the street. The text said, "Nicole just left your porch. She put something on your door." I drove home immediately. There was a large envelope taped to my front door. The envelope had my name written on it in marker. I pulled it off the door and opened it. Inside was a packet of documents. The first page was a formal complaint filed by Nicole against me. The complaint accused me of stealing a small travel bag from a car in the parking lot. The complaint included a witness statement from Nicole herself. She claimed she had seen me near the car on a specific date and time. The complaint also included a statement from the tow company vendor. The vendor statement said I had confessed to taking the bag, and the HOA was justified in pursuing enforcement action. I read the vendor statement 3 times. It was a lie. I had never spoken to the tow company. I had never confessed to anything. Nicole had fabricated the entire statement. The packet also included a payment plan document. The document said I owed $1,200 in fines and restitution for the stolen bag. The payment plan required me to pay $300 per month for 4 months, with an additional $100 administrative fee. If I refused, the HOA would place a lien on my property. I called Linda again. She did not answer. I left a voicemail and told her Nicole had escalated the situation and I needed help immediately. I also texted Rachel and told her what had happened. Rachel called me and told me to take photos of everything. I took photos of the packet, the complaint, the vendor statement, and the payment plan. Rachel told me to contact the tow company directly and find out if they had actually issued the statement. I looked up the tow company contact information online and called them. A man answered and identified himself as the dispatcher. I told him I was a resident of Briarwood Reserve and I needed to verify a vendor statement that had been submitted to the HOA. The dispatcher asked me for the case number. I read the number from the packet. The dispatcher put me on hold. After 2 minutes, he came back and told me they had no record of that case number. He said they had not issued any statements about residents in Briarwood Reserve in the last 6 months. I asked him if Nicole Barrett had contacted them recently. He said the name did not sound familiar. I asked him if he could check his logs. He said he would and asked me to call back in an hour. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. I hung up and sat on my couch. My hands were shaking. Nicole had fabricated evidence and submitted it to the HOA as part of a formal complaint. She was trying to force me into a payment plan for a theft I did not commit. I called the police non-emergency line and asked if I could file a report for harassment and fraud. The dispatcher told me I could come to the station and speak with an officer. I grabbed my keys and drove to the police station. The officer at the front desk listened to my story and took notes. He told me HOA disputes were civil matters, and the police could not intervene unless a crime had been committed. I told him Nicole had fabricated a vendor statement and submitted it as evidence. The officer said that might constitute fraud, but I would need to prove it. He said I should gather all my documentation and consult with an attorney. He also told me I could file a police report for harassment if Nicole continued to harass me in person. I asked him if he could document the complaint I had just made. He said he could create an incident report. He took my information and gave me an incident number. I left the station feeling slightly better, but still angry. I called the tow company again. The dispatcher answered and told me he had checked the logs. He said Nicole had called them 3 times in the last 2 weeks asking about enforcement procedures, but she had never mentioned my name or any specific case. He said they had not issued any statements and they had not been hired to tow any vehicles from Briarwood Reserve recently. I asked him if he could send me a written statement confirming that. He said he could email me a letter on company letterhead. I gave him my email address and thanked him. 10 minutes later, I received the email. The letter said the tow company had no record of any case involving me, and they had not issued any vendor statements to the Briarwood Reserve HOA regarding package theft or vehicle theft. I forwarded the email to Linda and asked her to include it in my complaint file. Linda replied and said the regional supervisor, a man named Tom, would be calling me the next day. That night, Rachel came over. She brought her laptop and a stack of sticky notes. She told me we were going to build a timeline of everything Nicole had done. We sat at my kitchen table and went through every notice, every email, every text message, and every piece of documentation. Rachel created a spreadsheet with dates, times, and descriptions of each incident. She also included links to the doorbell camera footage and the tow company letter. By midnight, we had a complete timeline. Rachel printed it out and put it in a binder. She told me this was my evidence binder and I needed to keep it with me at all times. The next day, Tom called me. He introduced himself as the regional supervisor for the management company and told me he had reviewed my complaint. He said Nicole had overstepped her authority, and the notices she had issued were not valid. He said the HOA board had not authorized any investigation into package theft, and Nicole had acted on her own. I asked Tom what would happen next. He said he would meet with Nicole and the board president to address the situation. He also said he would send me a letter confirming that the notices were invalid and I was not subject to any fines or access restrictions. I asked Tom about the vendor statement. He said he had spoken to the tow company and confirmed it was fabricated. He said Nicole would be required to issue a written apology. I told Tom that was not enough. I told him Nicole had publicly accused me of theft, harassed me at my home, and fabricated evidence. I told him I wanted her removed from the architectural committee. Tom said he could not make that decision unilaterally, but he would recommend it to the board. I told Tom I was considering legal action. He said he understood and asked me to give him a week to resolve the situation internally before I took any further steps. I agreed. The next morning, I received a text from Greg. He said Nicole had been at the mailbox cluster the night before, and he had seen her opening other people's mailboxes with a key. Greg said he had taken a photo. I asked him to send it to me. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a photo. The photo showed Nicole standing at the mailbox cluster with a key in her hand. She was opening a mailbox that was not hers. The timestamp on the photo was 11:30 at night. I called Tom and told him about the photo. Tom asked me to send it to him immediately. I forwarded the photo along with Greg's contact information. Tom said he would follow up with Greg and investigate. He said if the photo was legitimate, it would change everything. 2 days later, Tom called me again. He said he had interviewed Greg and reviewed the photo. He said the HOA had conducted a search of the clubhouse storage closet and found a cardboard box hidden behind some folding chairs. The box contained opened packages, a small travel bag, a stack of gift cards, and a ledger with handwritten notes. Tom said the ledger appeared to be a record of items Nicole had taken from residents. He said the HOA was treating it as a theft investigation and had contacted the police. I asked Tom if Nicole had been arrested. He said not yet, but the police were investigating. He said the HOA board had held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Nicole from the architectural committee immediately. He also said the board had voted to refund any fines or fees Nicole had collected over the last year. Tom said he was sending me a formal letter with the details, and I would receive a refund check within 2 weeks. That afternoon, Nicole showed up at my front porch. She was carrying a clipboard and her key ring. She told me we needed to talk. I told her to leave. She said she had new evidence that proved I was involved in the thefts. I told her the police were investigating her, not me. She said that was a lie. I pulled out my phone and called the police non-emergency line. Nicole panicked. She tried to grab my phone. I stepped back and held the phone out of reach. Nicole screamed that I was obstructing an investigation. A deputy arrived 10 minutes later. The deputy asked what was going on. I told him Nicole had been harassing me and I had called for help. Nicole told the deputy I was a suspect in a theft investigation and I was refusing to cooperate. The deputy asked Nicole if she was with law enforcement. Nicole said she was the HOA architectural committee member. The deputy told her that did not give her any authority to conduct investigations or demand cooperation. Nicole said the HOA had its own procedures. The deputy told her the HOA did not supersede the law. He asked Nicole to leave my property. Nicole refused. She said she had the right to enforce HOA rules. The deputy told her she was trespassing, and if she did not leave, he would arrest her. Nicole finally left. The deputy stayed for a few minutes and took my statement. He told me he was aware of the investigation into Nicole and the HOA thefts. He said I should document any further contact with Nicole and call the police if she returned. He gave me his card and left. That night, Rachel and I went through the evidence binder again. Rachel said we needed to make copies and distribute them to the neighbors. She said Nicole had been lying to everyone, and the truth needed to come out. I agreed. We printed 20 copies of a side-by-side timeline I had created that showed Nicole's accusations next to the actual evidence. The timeline included screenshots of the doorbell camera footage, the tow company letter, the photo of Nicole at the mailbox cluster, and a summary of the items found in the storage closet. The timeline did not include any readable text on the documents, just descriptions and timestamps. The next afternoon, I walked around the neighborhood and handed out copies of the timeline to my neighbors. Most of them thanked me and said they had suspected Nicole was lying. One neighbor, a woman named Maria, told me Nicole had tried to recruit her as a witness against me. Maria said Nicole had offered to waive a fine Maria owed if Maria testified that she had seen me acting suspiciously. Maria had refused. Maria said she was glad I had proof. Greg told me he had spoken to the police and given them the original photo file from his phone. He said the police had confirmed the photo was taken at the time and date shown in the metadata. Greg also told me the police had searched Nicole's car and found more stolen items, including packages and mail that belonged to other residents. 2 weeks later, Tom called me with an update. He said the police had charged Nicole with theft and fraud. He said the HOA had completed its internal review and confirmed that Nicole had been stealing from residents for at least 6 months. The ledger found in the storage closet showed Nicole had taken packages, mail, clubhouse supplies, and cash from petty cash funds. Tom said the HOA was working with the police to return the stolen items to the rightful owners. He also said the HOA's insurance carrier was reviewing claims for reimbursement. Tom told me the management company had issued a formal apology to me and the other affected residents. He said the HOA board had voted to implement new security measures, including cameras at the mailbox cluster and the clubhouse storage closet. Tom also said the vendor contract with the tow company had been reviewed, and the company had demanded proper documentation before taking any enforcement action. The tow company had stopped taking Nicole's calls after the fraud was discovered. I asked Tom what would happen to Nicole. He said she was facing criminal charges and a civil lawsuit from the HOA. He said she had been permanently banned from all HOA properties and her membership privileges had been revoked. Tom said the HOA would also be seeking restitution for the stolen items and the costs of the investigation. The refund check arrived 2 weeks later. It included the fines Nicole had issued, plus interest. The check also included a reimbursement for the $1,200 Nicole had tried to force me to pay in her fabricated payment plan. Rachel and I went to dinner to celebrate. She told me she was proud of me for fighting back. I told her I could not have done it without her help. She said we made a good team. I agreed. A month later, I ran into Greg at the mailbox cluster. He told me Nicole had been convicted and sentenced to probation and community service. He said she was also required to pay restitution to the HOA and the affected residents. Greg said the neighborhood felt safer now that Nicole was gone. I went back to my unit and looked at the evidence binder sitting on my kitchen counter. It was a reminder of how close I had come to being railroaded by someone who had weaponized the HOA for personal gain. I thought about all the other people Nicole had targeted and wondered how many of them had fought back. I was glad I had. The management office lobby was quiet when I stopped by a few weeks later to drop off a final document request. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman named Amy, looked up and recognized me. She smiled and said, "I heard about everything that happened with Nicole. I am glad you got it sorted out." I thanked her. Amy leaned forward and said, "You know, Nicole came in here a few days before she was arrested and tried to tell me you had confessed. She wanted me to put it in the file. I told her I could not do that without documentation. She got really mad and tried to hand me some note she had written herself. I told her that was not how it worked." Amy said, "Your camera does not matter. My minutes are the truth." That is what she told me. I had to correct her out loud while she kept insisting. I told her I could not accept her personal notes as official documentation. She stormed out. Amy shook her head and said, "I should have reported it then, but I thought she would just drop it." I am sorry. I told Amy she did not need to apologize. I said Nicole had lied to everyone, and Amy had done the right thing by refusing to cooperate. Amy said she was glad the truth came out. I left the office feeling like the weight of the last few months had finally lifted. That evening, I sat on my porch and watched the sunset over the Briarwood Reserve cul-de-sac. The neighborhood felt different now. People waved when they walked by. A few neighbors stopped to chat and thanked me for standing up to Nicole. One neighbor told me the HOA had scheduled a special election to fill the vacant architectural committee seat, and they were looking for candidates who believed in transparency and fairness. I said I was not interested in joining the HOA, but I appreciated the thought. Rachel came over later that night. She brought pizza and a bottle of wine. We sat on the couch and talked about everything that had happened. She said she had learned a lot about HOA politics and she was glad we had documented everything. I told her the evidence binder had saved me. Rachel raised her glass and said, "To evidence binders and doorbell cameras." I clinked my glass against hers and said, "And to standing up to people who think they are above the rules." The final piece of closure came a few weeks later. The HOA sent out a newsletter to all residents summarizing the investigation and the outcome. The newsletter confirmed that Nicole had been removed from her role, charged with theft and fraud, and banned from the property. The newsletter also announced new security measures and a revised enforcement process that required board approval for all fines and access restrictions. The newsletter included a list of residents who had been affected by Nicole's actions and confirmed that refunds and restitutions had been issued. I read the newsletter twice and then filed it in the evidence binder. I kept the binder on my bookshelf as a reminder that documentation and persistence could beat even the most determined bully. Nicole never contacted me again. I heard from Greg that she had moved out of the area after her conviction. He said her husband had filed for divorce and she was living with family in another state. Greg said the neighborhood was better off without her. I agreed. A contractor named Mike, who had done some work on the clubhouse, stopped me in the parking lot one afternoon. He said, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. Nicole tried to drag me into her mess. She told me I had to back up her story about you or she would cancel my contract. I told her I was not going to lie for her. She threatened to blacklist me with the management company. I ignored her. When the truth came out, I felt like I had dodged a bullet." Mike shook my hand and said, "You did the right thing." The missing stash was discovered in the clubhouse storage closet. The HOA had to refund fees to multiple residents, and Nicole was removed from her role. The vendor contract with the tow company was revised to require proper documentation, and the management company stopped taking Nicole's calls after the fraud was discovered. Nicole was caught with the stash box and could not talk her way out. A side-by-side timeline I printed and handed out in front of everyone became the final nail in the coffin of her credibility. The stress that had strained my relationship with Rachel eased. She told me she was proud of how I had handled everything, and she felt like we were stronger because of it. I agreed. The constant pressure of dealing with Nicole had taken a toll, but coming through it together had made us closer. I thought about everything that had happened. Nicole had weaponized the HOA to intimidate me at my door, fabricated evidence, lied to vendors, and tried to destroy my reputation. She had screamed at me in public, tried to take my phone, and threatened to place a lien on my property. But in the end, her lies caught up with her. The doorbell camera footage, the tow company letter, the timeline, the photo of her at the mailbox cluster, and the stash box in the storage closet all told the same story. Nicole was a thief and a liar, and she had finally been held accountable. I stood on my porch one last time and looked out at the quiet cul-de-sac. The neighborhood felt peaceful. The sunset was fading into dusk, and the streetlights were starting to flicker on. I thought about the receipt and return slip I had held up during that final confrontation. Everything blurred, but the proof still clear. I thought about the moment Nicole demanded proof and then panicked when I handed out copies. I thought about the receptionist correcting her out loud while she kept insisting. And I thought about the key ring she jingled like it was authority. Now gone forever. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.